Hello, this is Dr. Teresa Ulrich again, and you are looking at a cowfish. You may have noticed that my username on YouTube is Cowfish Pro. That's because I used to keep a couple of different species of cowfish. In fact, I used to write articles about them, and that stemmed from the fact that back when I first started keeping them, there was really very little information about them, so I thought I could contribute to the field. You are actually looking at a 300-gallon aquarium. I'll show you that. I have some live rock in there, but not much else. And yes, it's just a single fish in there right now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I've been interested in cowfish because they amaze me in ways that are very similar to seahorses. They have independent eye movement like seahorses do, and the way they move and swim in the water gives a similar appearance to seahorses, where as though they are some sort of marionette being moved along by a puppeteer above. They also have an ability to indicate in a way similar to seahorses. And what I mean by that is, if you know anything about seahorses or you don't, when seahorses are ready to mate, a lot of times they'll gesture or make a movement with their snouts and direct them upwards as though they're pointing to move in an upward direction. Well, cowfish, they will sort of jackknife. You'll see that really long tail that this cowfish has. They will almost split themselves in half, so to speak, moving their tail and their bodies in an upward position in a sort of V shape. And like seahorses, they will take an ashen color when they're communicating with another cowfish. Don't really have a name for this guy. I just call him Fella. Sweet little guy. This is a long-horned cowfish, even though being in captivity, his horns have not grown very long, and that's because they tend to rub against the aquarium glass. In nature, the horns get very long. The species is Lactoria cornuta, and it is an Indo-Pacific variety. Very sweet guy. I'm going to be feeding him in a few minutes to make a point that I wanted to talk about with this aquarium and make that connection with keeping seahorses. At one point, I did have only seahorses, no cowfish, and you can see in the seahorse I only have live rock and very little substrate. At one time, I did have substrate, and I had, I want to say, about 7 or 8 large seahorses in here. And even with so few seahorses in a 300-gallon aquarium, over time I noticed that the seahorses were developing health problems. And after doing some research, I realized that my issue was I was not able to keep this aquarium clean enough, and eventually was not able to keep seahorses in here anymore. Seahorses, when they eat, they are very, very messy. You'll notice that in the larger species, when you feed them their mysis shrimp, they'll literally spray all over through their gills, as well as during excretion. They don't have a true stomach, so food seems to go right through them, and basically everything just gets coated almost with a powdery paste-like substance. Very hard to get cleaned off of live rock, very hard to get to the bottom of a huge tank like this. So that's a consideration you have to make if you decide to keep seahorses. Will you be able to keep up with the husbandry to the point where the seahorse's stable is really quite clean? You have to do regular water changes and have the ability to get into the aquarium and really clean up very well. With just the one cowfish in here, and yes, it is just one, believe it or not, 300 gallons is a good amount for just one cowfish because they get extraordinarily large and have an extraordinary large waste load. I do a very small water change about once a week, but you're going to see my difficulty in working in this tank because it's so large. As much as I enjoy it, it's a little tricky doing some things like just feeding the cowfish as well as getting in there to get a good cleaning. So I am going to try to move my phone. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you dizzy, but I wanted to exemplify what it takes just to get in there to really feed the fish as well as even clean. So let me see if I can get my phone to stand up. And you're going to see, I hope you can still hear me, literally I have to get on a ladder to cowfish. That is how tall the aquarium is, and this is why it was very difficult for me to get this aquarium as clean as I needed to make it. So if I were to keep large seahorses again, I would definitely want to go with a smaller aquarium. Unfortunately, I don't really have the space for something that would need to be the size required for a larger species like the hippocampus erectus that I used to keep. So that's one of the reasons that I'm going to go back to working with dwarf seahorses. And before I feed him, let me just show you real quick. This is just a mixture of seafood and some algae pellets that have a high spirulina concentration, and fella over here just loves them. And you can see he's getting excited because he knows food's coming. So I'm going to put a piece of seafood in there for him and a couple of pieces of algae for him. And I've got to remember to close the lid because cowfish can jump out of the water, and I actually had it happen one time where one of my cowfish got so excited about food and I neglected to close the lid afterwards, and I found the poor guy on top of the tank petrified many hours later. I felt just awful. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning about my cowfish today and a little bit more about my process in making decisions for keeping seahorses and going back to the dwarf seahorses versus the larger ones. Talk to you soon.